Hello, thank you for joining us for our presentation today. We are just going to give people another 30 seconds to a minute to dial in and make sure we're set to go, and then we'll get started with the presentation. Thanks again. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks again, everybody, for attending our Richey May webinar today. Today's topic is navigating the agency application process. We are excited to have some executives from the Utopian Group here today to present on this topic. I'm going to go over some housekeeping items here to make sure we all understand how this is going to work. Everybody is placed on hold other than the presenters today. So if you do have a question, you will see in your webinar dashboard that we have a question section. If you want to go ahead and type your question into that section, we will receive those and answer those either as they come up or hold those to the end. If we do happen to run out of time, we do want to keep this to an hour. If we do run out of time, please note that we do get a comprehensive report at the end of the webinar letting us know who asked what question along with your contact info. So we will definitely have our presenters follow up with you. We will also record today's webinar, and we'll send out a recording and a copy of the slide deck to all the participants today. So please be on the lookout for that in the next day or two. For those of you who are looking to gain CPE credit, here's some information regarding our CPE credit for today. Please note that you must answer all 3 poll questions in order to qualify. You do not have to answer the poll questions correctly, but please make sure that you do answer all 3 of those in order to qualify for CPE. A survey will also appear on your screen following the end of the webinar, so please do answer that. We would really appreciate your feedback in order to help us ensure that these presentations are meaningful going forward. And those who do qualify for CPE will receive your CPE certificates of completion within the next few days following the webinar via email, so please look for those as well. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Seth Cohen, and he's going to introduce our presenters today.
Thank you, Rachel. My name is Seth Cohen. I work up here at Richey May in the mortgage banking practice. As Rachel mentioned, today we have John Borden and Vicki Cullen from the Utopian Group, and they're here to walk you through some of the requirements for getting your agency approval. John and Vicki have deep experience within mortgage banking and have held executive positions at companies such as Bayview, Hanover Capital, Bank of America, and USAA. They have a tremendous amount of expertise in mortgage operations, including process optimization, due diligence, quality control, and more specifically, walking through companies through this approval process. With that, I will hand it over to them.
Great. Thanks, Seth. Hello, I'm John Borden. I'll be one of your panelists today. And as Seth had said, that Vicki Cullen of the Utopian Group will also be presenting a lender's guide to navigating the agency application process. Just a little bit about Utopian Group before we get started. Utopian provides consultative services to banks, credit unions, mortgage companies, etc. And in the areas of process optimization, process mapping, secondary marketing, project and change management, risk control, process mapping, policies, procedures, etc. With that said, let's get started. I don't believe I have control here. There we go. Okay. So Just a brief overview, what we'll be discussing today is we'll walk you through what the seller approval process looks like from a perspective of the application. We'll talk a little bit about how to get prepared for this and get your pre-application set, the actual submission of the application, and then the subsequent on-site due diligence, how to prepare for that, how to go through that process, what to expect, if you will. Similarly, we'll talk about the agency servicing approval. Some of you might just be going for seller approval and not necessarily servicing, but we felt it'd be a good idea to talk about that if you are attempting to just go for seller at this stage of time. You may look for what it means to go through the servicing approval as well. And likewise, we'll talk about the pre-application process for that, the application submission, and then the follow-through to the sub-servicing oversight for the loan servicing group. Okay, I'll pause right now for our first survey question.
I just launched that survey question. You should see that on your screen right now. We'll give it about 25 to 30 seconds for everybody to answer that. Right, it looks like we have most of our answers in. I'm going to go ahead and close that poll question.
Thank you much. Okay. Basically, you want to treat the application process and the approval process as a project because it's important that the lender review their current business application and business process and understand exactly how you operate, how you manufacture your loans, how you produce them, et cetera. And the best way to do that is to conduct your own internal due diligence. But before you do that, the best way to do that is to start with an approval team. And the approval team is not the person who's approving it, but it's the people who are behind it, gathering the information for the application, walking it through, being able to answer the questions that the investors have and guide the process all the way through from both sides, not just the investors that you're speaking to or the agencies that you're speaking to, but also your own employees, if you will. So our suggestion is that you assign a project manager or a team lead who basically will identify the critical tasks and be your quarterback, for lack of a better term. Typically, an agency application is has a sponsor in secondary marketing, but that could come from a president's office or from an administrative office somewhere else. But that's not who is necessarily leading the project. The project manager is the person who's going to motivate others to finish on time. He's going to keep track of everything that happens, going to gather all the materials as requested, is going to take a look to make sure they're on time, and basically is going to be the keeper of all the documentation and making sure everybody dances together well. I like to consider the project manager as the conductor of the orchestra. So if any of you have kids in band, you know that it's a terrible noise that happens when everyone wants to play their own tune and nobody's conducting. When everybody gets to march together, the conductor, or the project manager in this case, coordinates all the efforts of all the players, and beautiful music comes out as the analogy. So our suggestion is your band or your representatives will consist of people from your direct operations, from your sales, your processing, your underwriting, closing, and secondary market and post-closing operations, depending on how you're organized. Supportive services are those services that are going to be involved in the process for one part or another. For instance, IT may be a great place to start. We'll talk about process maps in a bit. But IT might be a great resource for how your systems interact, and therefore might have already done and know a lot about how your company operates and manufactures those loans. Your loan servicing group, depending on if you're going for full approval and for agency approval for a seller and servicer, they'll either be fully involved as a direct operations or indirectly involved or supportively involved for just an approval process for selling. And the point being there is loan servicing has an aspect of how loans are boarded, how they're off-boarded, et cetera, along those lines. So that's a critical piece. And they may or may not be direct or indirect depending on how and what you're actually going for. Human resources will be a key participant because they're going to give you what you need for, and we'll talk about that later, about bios and of your key servicing people. And then lastly, your legal compliance and possibly another, depending on how you're organized again, would be your risk group. Okay, so now that you have all your players together, you want to have a kickoff meeting. And that kickoff meeting would basically to communicate to all your service managers and all the players what's going to be the expectations of, et cetera, along those lines. It's also to talk about what you're going to need from them going forward about, hey, this is the kind of things we're looking for in the application. We need you to go ahead and gather these things. But before you get to that kickoff meeting, I strongly suggest, that your project manager create a project plan. And if you've never created a project plan before, it can be done in the relatively simple way of using a spreadsheet version to keep task of, hey, step one is I need to do this, step two I need to do this, et cetera, and I need that by this period of time, just to kind of keep track of whether or not you have everything that you need by the time that you need it. You might want to consider Microsoft Project, but Microsoft Project can be very daunting and very involved. There's another software out there called Smartsheet. I'm not selling it, but it's an amazing little piece of software that we'll show you in a little bit because it's so simple and it can be shared by all members without having a tremendous knowledge of Microsoft Project. I've used it on collaborative efforts when I'm trying to get information back from a number of people who are not necessarily project managers or project smart, but they are and can run a spreadsheet. This will allow them to update in a spreadsheet manner, and therefore you don't spend a lot of time having to update the, where you stand on the progress of the plan. We'll show you a sample of what that looks like in a little bit, but basically you want to be able to keep track of that. And the way to develop your project plan is to think of it like an outline. An outline, when you're writing something, at least from my third grade teacher, English teacher spoke to me, you start with your highest level task. What you want to say in the beginning, middle, and the end. And so project plan is very similar. You start with the highest level and you identify what you need to do, step 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then you break those down a little bit further into, well, what does that mean, right? So if I'm going to make a sandwich, well, what do I need to do? The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the refrigerator and pull out my meat, and then I'm going to grab unless you're a vegetarian, maybe you'll pull out your salad or your lettuce, etc. The bottom line is that you want to break that down. Well, what does it mean to go to the refrigerator? Break that down by saying I need to walk across the kitchen, open the door, etc. So there's steps involved with each of the larger steps. I don't mean to diminish what we're doing here, but at the simplest level, it's to break it down. Once you've identified all those steps and gone through it, and like I said, the easiest way is to start at the highest, not to tackle at the lowest spot and then dig up. It's easier to start at the top and dig down into the lower detail. Once you've identified each of those tasks, then you need to assign the resources to the tasks and develop a timeline of how long do you think it's going to be able to get them and when they can start the process. Now that might seem a little daunting as you go through it, but when you use a project plan, you can actually see some of the dependencies that may come in there. For instance, my analogy about the sandwich, I can't grab the meat until I open up the refrigerator. So, when somebody asks me when is that going to be done, well, it's dependent on earlier processes. Keeping track of those earlier processes can easily be done within a project management software. Also, if I'm late in delivering one piece for another, we need to understand the impact of what that means on the overall project with respect to our deliverables and the time frame to go ahead and compete it in. I'll show you in a second what that would look like and some of the nice little things and features that can come out of that. But once you have your project plan complete, you want to be able to communicate with all the managers and the staff, again, the roles that they'll be doing, and most importantly, the written policies and procedures in place. And the process of what would be expected of them, the documentation, things along those lines. And then lastly, what the project manager does is monitor the completion of the tasks, takes a look at whether or not we're on target, identifies critical control points or critical points within the process that if I don't get it by X, I'm going to blow my date, et cetera, along those lines. So again, if you think of the project manager, he's basically the conductor, making sure that that music is played instead of just noise. Okay. Oops, sorry. Yep. There we go. So my sample project plan here is going to be launched in a second on this hyperlink. Okay, so I have, this is Smartsheet. It's available online. You can go ahead and grab it if you just Google out Smartsheet. There's a 30-day trial. The free day, you can see I have 28 days left for purposes here. And again, I've used this throughout various different projects when people don't necessarily have Microsoft Project or don't want to spend the tremendous amount. This is a great in-between solution. It's also completely compatible with Microsoft Project. So if you wanted to use that, but your organization or your rest of your organization uses Microsoft Project, you're still okay because they'll be able to import the project timelines. But basically, if you, just a quick here, you'll see the task name up above. You'll see the start, the finish date, and the duration of how long it's going to take. This is a very simple plan, and the total that I've got is it's at 64 days. Well, did I just guess 64? No, it actually comes from guessing a bunch of times instead of one big time. The agency approval project consists of those high-level steps that I spoke of. So you're going to designate your team members, you're going to do supportive services, you're going to notify them, then you're going to have a kickoff meeting, you're going to confirm the application information, you're going to submit it, you're going to prepare for your on-site due diligence, they're going to conduct the due diligence, and then you're going to receive approval. All these dates here are driven by how long it takes to do each of these processes here, and within each of these processes, how long it's going to take those processes to go ahead and do. On the right here, you kind of see a Gantt chart prepared of what the milestones are, which is our kickoff meeting is scheduled right now for the 24th if everybody gets notified and signs into who the representative is. So in this particular example, Tom and Jerry, the sales has nominated Tom to essentially be their center point of contact, Jerry for processing, but underwriting, closing, secondary, and post-closing servicing haven't. We expect that was going to be happening in a day, so by tomorrow I expect to see answers to all these guys. But today I was supposed to see something from underwriting. Well, let's just say, for instance, that I found out that underwriting's not going to be able to get back to us for till I don't know, Monday of next week because they're on vacation. There's nobody else that can essentially make that. Well, great. We can go ahead and schedule it for next Monday. When we do, what happens is the date gets kicked out, and so all of a sudden now this is now taking me to the 15th, which extends out what this period of time is, or I'm sorry, the 25th, which extends this period of time to go ahead and do it. This date right here got extended, and all the dependencies drive off that. Now what that says is this date from a project management standpoint can tell when this is going to happen, and if something falls behind, that automatically adjusts. As the project manager, you're going to be notating and watching to make sure that you're on time, that you actually deliver. Now you can get very much into the software, and I don't recommend you do because I've seen people get way too overset on using a software and not into management. Remember, you are still managing a project. And again, you'll notify, your supportive services along with that, and then there's these interdependencies. The dependencies are exactly what I said. I can't have a kickoff meeting, which is item 2, right off here on item 15, without talking about number 2 and number 10. So you build these dependencies and you say, you start with, these are the things I need to do, then you fill in that in, and then you write in the date of I can start here, but, and I think it's going to take X number of days. These dates get filled in by the computer, and then you basically say, well, I can't really do that until I do this task up here, so number 2 becomes a dependent. And also I got to do number 10 before I do that. And then what happens is you end up building out your entire project plan based on what it will take to go ahead and do this. And you can see that at the end, you can see your dependencies and everything else. Now, it can get quite complicated, but that's the beauty of these minuses and pluses, is that you can basically shrink it down to what you need to see. Okay? All right. Let's go back to the presentation. Okay. So once you have your project plan set, you actually want to start, you'll start getting into what you need to gather, if you will, and the actual process of gathering all the information for your internal due diligence. And that's going to begin with a pre-application process, which is basically to confirm your application information and required documentation is available. So all those managers are going to be identified to say, this is what I need from you, you know, and it's mostly surrounded around policies, procedures, and perhaps information about, you know, what other secondary marketing, you know, what approvals you've received from other ones, et cetera, along those lines. And then lastly, you want to update and track agency approval activity on the project plan. So as you go, you want to see your progress to be able to do that. That should be included in your project plan. The big part about the application is understanding how you manufacture your loan. And what I want to take a second here, because this is a really big deal, because people tend to use the word policy and procedure interchangeably, and it's a mistake to do so. When you're talking about a policy, you're talking about the what your company is doing, versus a procedure is how do you go about doing the what. So how do you go about satisfying what your company wants to do in your operations? So again, policy is the what, procedure is the how. You start by looking at your process maps. Many organizations may not have them. I highly suggest that you do, because it's basically an outline of how you operate and how you manufacture your loan. Process maps can be used to identify critical control points, which is those areas of your manufacturing process that, if aren't performed, the rest of the the result is failure, if you will. It can also identify redundancies in operations, and it also gives you the big picture of how your production operates. Many times I've gone into organizations, done a process map, and much to the surprise of the executive management, they're appalled that they're doing what they are, what's been done, what's been shown to them on this particular map. And the common answer is, why are we doing it that way? And the answer is, who knows, but it happened, throughout the course of a period of time. The benefits of doing process map, and beyond what we just suggested about, is system enhancements in the future can use those process maps to understand what the impact of the new system will be on the operations. They can be used by quality control and quality improvement activities to be able to understand what are those critical points, and do we have reporting and necessary stopgaps in place to keep them from failing and having critical failures. And then lastly, process improvement, how to get the most out of your operations. I'll pause for survey question number 2.
All right, you should see that appearing on your screen right now. You can submit your answer. We'll give it 25 to 30 seconds. All right, it looks like everybody has voted. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now. Thank you.
So once you have your process maps complete, you want to compare those to basically how you operate, there we go. Oops, too far. You want to make sure that you look at those process maps and compare them to your actual operations. And so it's basically a stare and compare. and where you're looking at to make sure that you have the correct process down pat. When the process maps are created and reflect your current operations, then you review them against your policies, which, remember, is the what, not the how. You've documented the how, now you need to see the what. And this is where your legal, compliance, and risk, depending on how that's organized, come into play. They'll give you their opinion about what you're doing, whether or not you are within the policy of the bank or mortgage company or organization, and whether or not you're operating within those lines. If you are, then your policies will map to it, and everything will be great. You want a policy, and you're going to be submitting policies to the agency. You want to make sure that you're backing it up with what you're doing. Too many times those become disconnected, where policy is, we're going to, we promise not to do X, but in reality, that's what you're doing. Your process maps will show that, and it will show that you're not necessarily connected in terms of all on the same page, which will throw up a red flag. So based on that review from your legal, compliance, and risk partners, you will either revise your operations, revise your policy. Most likely you'll revise your operations to be within the policies. However, you could revise your policy because, for instance, you may be lending in a particular case, especially in banks where the policies tend to be really broad range and cover things along the lines of credit cards to mortgages, et cetera, along those lines, and therefore it's hard to use a very big paintbrush that they use in policy to cover all the bank's activities. And one of the detriments might be is that there was an disparate impact that came from a policy being too broad-based that essentially precluded you from doing the operations. That policy maybe needed to be changed and modified slightly so that you can go ahead and continue to do the process that you're doing. Chances are that won't happen, but if it does happen, you need to be prepared, because sometimes that takes a great amount of time, because policy is a big deal in bank, and policy will take a while. So make sure you build in enough time in your project plan to make sure that it's not a one-day occurrence. It's not a one-day event, that it might be a couple. So talk to your compliance teams, your legal teams, your risk teams, understand what that looks like, understand the time frame, if the board has to meet, et cetera, along those lines when you're plugging that in. Okay. At this point, I'm going to ask if there's any questions in terms of this. If not, then we'll move on forward. And Vicki, you want to take over here?
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Vicki Cullen. I'm going to discuss a few of the requirements still involved with the pre-application process to get you ready to submit a complete application to the agency. We start with what does the agency want to see. This is going to be your first opportunity to put together what your organization looks like. And a lot of companies, when they get down to the contracting piece, lenders will have to put together, and a lot of times it's going to different parts of your company to figure out where the contract is. The agencies are going to hope that you have these handy, and you have your fully executed contract handy for all of the business processes you have in place. For example, they're going to look for the ownership of your company, make sure you have all your license and contract approvals in place. They want to know that your business obviously is to originate, sell, and service residential mortgages. Some people have warehouse line approvals, others will be in-house. But again, they'll be looking for documentation to show that you are currently in business and who your business contracts are already with. Can't overemphasize this enough. A lot of times, I know in companies, big and small, a lot of times there's different parts of the operation who are integral in all contributing to the contract process. But I think as a repository, this is kind of a heads up to say it's a really good thing to get together and figure out where are all your signed contracts, make sure they're fully executed, and they're current, and they address the current business you're currently doing, so there's no questions asked saying you've got an old contract, you have an outdated contract, your approval is incomplete. So this is really just the foundation, the ground floor of making sure that you go through the first part of the grabbing process and making sure all your contracts are in place, all of them are fully executed, and you have access to them to be able to provide those to the agencies. Okay, bear with me. I think I'm trying to change the screen. Great, thank you for helping me out on that one. Okay, and then there are some prerequisites for all the agencies, whether it's Fannie, Freddie, or Ginnie. And in regard to financial information, everybody asks for information just a little bit differently, but in general, they're looking for you to show them that you've got audited financial statements in place, and it could be approximately 2 to 3 years. They could be asking for a certain number of quarterly financials. They're going to want to determine that you've got the net worth that's required, as well as minimum liquidity to do business with them. Again, they're going to assess your financial status with them because they're going to be looking at counterparty risk. So whether it's, you have to provide interim financials for, depending on when you would provide your last audited financial statements to them, they could be looking for interim financials and quarterly call reports as well. And fundamental to the application process with all of the agencies, it's really knowing that you have your insurance requirements in place. Even though each one of them have their insurance requirements pretty well specified individually to them, the nuts and bolts of it is that they're going to look for your fidelity bond and your errors and omissions insurance, and they're going to look for your completed policy. So again, this is just a helpful hint to not overlook the obvious, I would guess, to say that you have these in place and you have them available to share them. And if you don't, it gives you time to go back to wherever you need to track it down and make sure you've got the correct policies in place. And I think if the rigor is already there, it's a non-event, but again, just as a heads up to make sure that you guys have those handy so that you're able to attach that to the information to provide, because it will be a requirement. Overall, from the financial information they're looking at, they just want to make sure that you've got a proven track record of profitability, and all of the information that you'll be compiling for them is all to make sure that they have a good partner. They're looking at you have the ability and the financial wherewithal to do business with them, you have quality loans, and you know your business. So again, the request for production reporting will come, they'll all ask for different kinds of reporting, but again, the bottom line is for you to be able to prove to them and show them face forward just how financially sound you really are. Okay, and some additional audit reporting that will be requested, and quality control always seems to be first and foremost. In regard to pre and post funding, all of the agencies, Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie, they all focus in on what your quality control plan is. A lot of folks may have quality control plans, but it's really putting the rubber to the road and making sure that you're using it. It's being audited. Whether you have part of it, internal, or you have an external quality control partner working with you, that when there's specified requirements, and there's actually questionnaires prior to even submitting your application to the agencies, just to make sure that you know exactly what's required of the plan, to make sure it adheres to their requirements. And so it's very important, if there's one red flag from the very beginning, in order to proceed, usually it all comes down to quality control and what you have in place already for the review of your loans, and what kind of reporting is in place. They'll request reporting as well. And it's not so much that you have issues or errors on your reporting, it's really how do you address them, how does management respond to these, and how is it communicated throughout the rest of the operation to make sure that you truly are managing the quality of your loan process. Another request will come based on the business that you're currently doing is if you're dealing with other investors, they'll request report cards, they'll request references. They're going to look to see how you're currently doing business, especially if you haven't done business with the agencies yet. They want to try to get a handle on exactly how you've been working with other investors. What do your loans look like, your loan quality, and the delinquency reporting. It's something that obviously if you don't have business on record with them, they have nothing to go on except for the fact that you're currently doing business, you're doing it well, and this is your opportunity to say, here's our investors, this is the current business we're doing with our investors. So it would be a very easy transition to be working with the agencies down the road. In regard to servicing and sub-servicing, again, all of these we're going to talk a little bit further on. Again, we're talking from a contract perspective. Very important that you don't take for granted that you have everything you need from a servicing or a sub-servicing standpoint. And if you have interim servicing as well, to make sure your contracts address that as well. Again, still going back to the fact that this is in your gathering phase to make sure you have all the pertinent information you need and your contracts are fully executed. Internal and external audits, they will ask for, sometimes they'll ask you for an attestation that you are in good standing with all of the agencies that you're currently doing business with, and sometimes they will actually ask for your actual audit reporting. Third-party vendor management. There's a lot of folks that do different businesses with a lot of different closing attorneys and deal with fraud and credit, and they're going to look to see what is your reporting, what does your vendor management look like, what are the contracts in place, what is your approval process, and how would you actually, how are they audited, and how do you manage that audit process as well. Okay, in regards, oops, I went too far there. In regards to personnel management, very important, and a lot of times, sometimes taken for granted that we know we've got great people, we've got great staff working with us. They want to see not only your resumes, and they're going to want to see your organizational charts, but most importantly, they're going to want to know that that experience of what they're managing is over the area that they have experience in. The rubber will actually meet the road on this when you get to an on-site audit. It's going to be really critical for everybody to take a look at who they currently have in place and what critical roles, because those are typically the people, once you report it to them and they've got your organizational charts and they see who your management is, they see the resumes. By the time that you get to the grand finale where they actually do an on-site review with you, they're going to actually want to talk to these people who you're saying are in these management roles. So it's not to be overlooked in any which way. Everybody knows that they're doing their, you know, you've got current business to do, and you're obviously doing it very well. It's just that you're going to want to put together and make sure that you do have updated resumes from folks, and you do have your organizational charts updated. Again, just a little bit more to dot your I's and cross your T's to make sure that you're able to say, hey, this is our group of management. These are our experts. They know their business, and they are able to communicate with the agencies in their responsible areas of business. I'm sorry, I think mine's either delayed or, sorry, I think it's just a delay. Okay, and then want to move on a little bit into what John had previously touched upon, the criticalness of process and procedures for all areas of the origination business. This one is a really big key to, I believe, to getting the approval, and sometimes this would go hand in hand with and be done a whole lot easier if you have your process flows in place. This is an opportunity for you to, again, hopefully get the right point people in place, go through the collection phase, and start to organize what your process and procedures are in all the areas of sales, origination, processing, underwriting, closing, funding, and secondary marketing, as well as all of these other areas which are critical, obviously, to the components of the manufacturing process. These are highly looked upon, too, to make sure that they're just, anybody can do process flows and process and procedures for a generic company, a mortgage banking company, but the agencies want to look to organizations and say, this is really what you do, and these are the people who do it, and you know what you're doing. It's specific to you. There are a lot of policies and procedures out there, and there's a lot of helpful hints on how to make them your own, but this is really, really critical to make sure that when you have your on-site audit, that when you prove to them that you're ready to do business with the agencies, all of this will come together very easily for you if you've already well documented your process and procedures, so they know this is your business, this is how you do your business, and then if any questions are asked, there might be a process or a procedure that you might have identified that you knew you're in the process of improving or changing, and that's fine too. But it's really critical that if you look at the heart of what's being requested here, it's really everything you do today for the mortgage business. It's just making sure that you've got it written out. And the people who are doing the jobs are usually the best test to make sure that when they go through those procedures, they're really the procedures that are currently in place. Is it the right, have you changed LOSs? Have you changed your risk management system? Have you changed your vendor management process and approval process? Is your business continuity plan, do you need to update that as well to make sure if something happens with third-party vendor, you know how to react? So again, this is probably the really the heart of what the focus would be on, and really would be a great opportunity for you guys for everybody to get it in place. It will help with every other audit you do as well, and it's something that's very critical, I think, to every operation. It just comes very face forward at the point in time that the agencies are looking for this information. Okay, part of going for a request to the agencies, as John had touched upon earlier, it's an organization's strategy to determine what do they want to do with their loans. Do they want to apply for a seller approval and or a servicing approval? So I would just want to walk you through a little bit to determine what your exit strategy are and what you might want to consider before you submit your application, so you have a pretty good handle on what the opportunities are with the agencies. So in regard to loan sale and servicing opportunities, we'll start with the selling part first. You're going to want to make sure, obviously, from your secondary marketing standpoint, evaluate the current business you do today. And if you're already dealing with the agencies, then this is just another agency. This is just another determination of what you want, what to put in your toolbox with another agency. If you're doing individual investor sales, and which is a little bit different, now you're walking into a secondary where you have a chance to either deliver cash or MBS. With that said, you also have the opportunity for best efforts and mandatory. And again, before you even get to the servicing aspect of it, you're probably going to want to walk through what are your best execution, what are your products that can be approved with the agency, what are your products that you want to be hedging, and then the next question will be, depending on how I want to sell these loans and what my best execution really is, do I have an appetite to keep servicing retained? Do I have in-house servicing already set up? Or perhaps do I want to have a subservicer in play that will subservice on our behalf? Or do I simply want to go down the path of servicing release? So it takes you from the thought process to say, yes, I want to sell to the agencies, but I also need to determine and request from the agencies how I want to sell these loans from a servicing standpoint. So again, there's servicing retain options, obviously with the agencies, your in-house servicing, or to set up a sub-servicing relationship. And again, keeping in mind that if you set up a sub-servicing relationship where it's not your in-house servicing, you still have the same reps and warrants to the agencies on that servicing oversight, as well as if you're doing it yourself. So that's really important to make sure that you've got the same expertise in place for the oversight of sub-servicing as well as if it's in-house. And then there are several different ways you can sell your loan servicing release to the agency: a concurrent transfer of servicing co-issue. Ginnie Mae has a PIP program, and all of these go through the approval process. So again, as you go through and you determine what your strategic exit strategy is, again, those are just options for you to be aware of and to look into further with the agencies to determine what best fits your needs at this time. In regard to your request for an agency servicing approval, I touched a little bit upon the oversight part of it, but for servicing retained decisions and options in regards to your internal servicing, they're going to, the agencies are going to look to you to show them that you have experience in all areas of your servicing, that again, when they look at your resumes and they look at your process and procedures, they look at the policies and the oversight in place, they're just going to, they want to make sure and ensure that you have everything you need from an internal servicing aspect so that they can approve you as well for a servicer in addition to being a seller. They're going to look at the technology platform that you use. They'll know, obviously, they're dealing with a lot of different servicers out there. So they will definitely, you definitely need to share with them who you're dealing with, who they are, and make sure they're an approved servicer on behalf of the agencies. In addition to sub-servicing as well, if you deem you're not an operation or an organization that wants to build your in-house servicing or you don't currently have that at this time, then obviously you can go through for an approval, and you need to get your executed contract in place yourself with the sub-servicer and make sure that, again, you have the experience you have in place. Not just because you sub-service it is it good to go. You definitely still need to make sure that you've got the expertise in place to provide that oversight of the sub-servicer on behalf of the agencies. And again, that technology platform will be shared with the agencies, and again, they will have to approve that for you. If you choose not to sell on a servicing retained basis, then you certainly would be welcome to apply with them on servicing release options only. You go through the cash delivery, and they have different servicing release options. They also have a concurrent transfer servicing option. Okay, as well as we talked an awful lot about the seller side of the approval process, very similar on the servicing side of the approval. You're going to want to still utilize a checklist and have somebody in place to organize all the servicing information required in regard to your fully executed contracts, whether it's for your interim subservicer or just subservicing in general, your servicing organizational chart, process flows, your manager names and applicable titles, servicing management, and subservicing oversight is just as critical, and I can't stress it enough, and I probably did say it, probably have gone to overkill to say, even if you do subservice, it is extremely important, and there's so much sensitivity, obviously, on the servicing side to make sure that you have everything really well documented in regards to your policy, process, and procedures, as well as your reporting. And they're going to want to know what your controls are in place for monitoring all the functions of the subservicer as well, because technically it is you in the agency, you are the responsible party for reps and warrants to the agencies, even if you are have a subservicer in place to do the servicing on your behalf. And then it will be very critical for you to be able to provide to them down the road what your subservicing audit reports have looked like, and if there are any issues that you are reconciling them, and management reporting is sound and in place to control any of the issues that may arise either day-to-day or monthly or weekly, just to make sure that there's management response and the oversight is very much involved with monitoring all the functions as if you were doing it in-house your own self. All right, so now we're getting almost to the grand finale. All of the pre-application process, you've gathered all your information, you've really well documented everything, you're ready to provide everything you have to the agency. It's very important that, again, you keep in mind that this is the first initial full view of your mortgage business process and controls, and at this point, you're going to be providing to them and attesting to them that everything you have is truly what you have in place, and it's truly how you do your business. Once you submit your application, and you only want to submit a completed application and give it your best first shot, obviously you never know where you're going to fall into the path of their approvals, but it's always best if you can get to them a completed application, all the required information that they are looking for, so that they can do a full review and assess everything about your current manufacturing process, which includes the effectiveness of your controls and your demonstrated ability to originate and service quality loans. That's really what they're looking for. Once they get your completed application package with all the information, another key is to really be prepared to respond back to additional requests. There are always additional requests. It doesn't mean good nor bad. It just means that they've got questions and they're looking for additional information, or they need a little bit more of an explanation. So the critical part is to having somebody on point, whether it's somebody in one of your areas, or it's your project manager, whoever it is, they need somebody on point to make sure that they're prepared when the agencies respond. Take advantage of a quick response from them, and hopefully you can get a quick response back to them to keep the process moving. And just a side note, it's really critical to take this seriously and to not risk an agency denial of your application. That would be reportable to current investors. So once you submit your application, you want to stay really close to this process with the agencies. You want to make sure if you get a hint that there's something not going in the right direction, or that you might not have everything you need at this time, to maybe pen the application. But it's really critical to get that approval status. It's vital to maintaining current agency investor relationships, as well as others, such as FHA, VA, and HUD. Because again, you want to make sure that you give them your first view of your company, what you want them to see of your company, be able to respond to them very quickly, modify where you need to modify them, and the grand finale will hopefully be an approval. But it can, just so that you have folks on standby and everybody knows how critical it is, and you've got your deadline to accomplish, and then when you got that successful approval, you're ready to move on. Just not to underestimate that. If you don't send all your application information to them, you might want to send something a little later. I would advise against it and say give it your best first shot right out of the gate, and then be prepared to respond promptly, and then hopefully you'll get one step closer to an approval with the agencies. The grand finale will be, and I say this from the very beginning to the end, once you have all your process and procedures in place, and you've shown the agencies everything you possibly could to document how you do your business today, the grand finale will be, or where the rubber will meet the road, is really when they do an operational readiness on-site audit with you. They'll notify you ahead of time that they're ready for the on-site. It's kind of the grand finale. And then you should take that as seriously as you have the whole entire process. And what they will do is they're going to send to you any additional information they need to see, any current information they need to see, such as financials and reporting and quality control and such, that has been aged a little bit as you've gone through this process with them. And they're going to want to see that you're putting together the full package, anything that's updated. So when they come on site by you and they actually do the walkthrough, the grand finale is they finally get to meet all of your people who are actually doing these jobs, who know their business very well, and can address any of the questions that they have when they come in, again, as the final part to the approval process. So when you get to that part, it's just very important to make sure that, again, you regroup your team, you let them know how important it is, get your point people in place, get the requests from the agencies, what information they want to see, go through that gathering process, respond as promptly as you can, with as completed information as you can, and then confirm the date when they'll be on site. And then again, that's where the rubber meets the road. This is your opportunity as a mortgage banker and a lender to be able to say, we're ready to do business with Fannie, Freddie, or Ginnie Mae, and this is why. Okay.
All right, we're going to launch. Sorry about that, Vicki. We're going to go ahead and launch our final survey question. So you should be seeing that on your screen right now. If you could go ahead and vote, 25 to 30 seconds, and we'll close it out. All right, it looks like all our votes are in. Thank you. I have that closed now. And Vicki and John, if you want to end with the summary, like we're in the final stretch.
Sure. Vicki, go ahead.
Sure, sorry about that. So then once you've made the decision, the lender's made the decision, if you want to apply for your seller and or servicing approval, again, lender will have the opportunity to demonstrate the ability to originate and or service the loans with adequate staff and procedures. You're going to develop, review, revise all of your origination servicing processes and procedures. I'm sorry? And process and procedures, and make sure that they're applicable to all the agency required guidelines. Coordinate all required agency application information within your specified time frames. Hopefully you've targeted all of your deadlines, and you're going to meet your expected time frames. And then the grand finale, submit that completed application package and be prepared to respond promptly for additional requests for information. Be proud and wait for the final decision, and keep in touch with the agencies along the way just to make sure those lines of communication are very clear. And hopefully you'll end up with a successful application. Again, reminder, agencies don't have to give approvals, but when you submit your best foot forward and you work with them and you've got all your information available to you, you obviously are an origination company, you know your business, you know it well, it's your chance to shine in front of the agencies.
This time, if there's any questions relative to what we presented or about the process, we'd be happy to entertain answering them.
It looks like we just had one question come in either for Vicki or John. What has been your experience with obtaining Ginnie approval?
Vicki, you want to take that?
Sure. I think you could apply to any of the approvals. Again, I would say they all expect you to dot your I's and cross your T's. It's a lengthy process. Again, it's very critical when you get their application to not answer any of their questions. Do not submit it without all the information required. So I don't know if this question is regarding time frame. Time frames are never guaranteed, and I've seen approvals take many months. It just depends on the environment at the time. But in regard to Ginnie Mae, I would say Ginnie Mae is a dot your I's and cross your T's. I think the application process is if you've got all this information available, you need to present it to them and give it to them. And I would say if you don't have it available, don't submit it until you do. And I can't emphasize enough with all of them. Make sure it's a completed application. And if you're still working on a quality control plan, you're just not quite there, or you need to get another document that's just not there, or you don't have a fully executed contract that's just not there, I think you really just want to hold off and do the right thing and dot your I's and cross your T's and present it all at once, because I think you might get lost in the shuffle as they have a lot of people, a lot of different lenders applying for their approval. It just seems best that if you have all your information, you don't go to the bottom of the line, that you stay at the top of the pack with your package, because it is completed and you work through the questions or remaining questions, but you don't do anything that would extend the time frame, because I think they extend their time frame as well on their own.
Thanks, Vicki. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, it looks like there's one question that popped up about how the Utopian Group can help you through the process. The reality is that we can assist as a participant, or we can help be that project manager or the SME level. There's a number of different ways in assisting in the process that we can do. You know, whether it be, you know, conducting the due diligence and gathering that information from your firm, to organizing as a team project manager, to being SME level experience about how to submit to help you with your on-site evaluations. I mean, the list goes on. You know, basically everything that we presented today, we can in some way help you by taking a lot or just a little.
Great, thank you. It looks like that was the final question for today, so we'll wrap up a couple minutes early. If you do have additional questions, please feel free to contact us with those questions to make sure that we can get that to John and Vicki, and they can follow up with you directly. Thank you so much to John and Vicki today for the great information. I'm sure you all found that valuable. We do present these webinars. We try to do these at least 4 times a year, so please do be on the lookout for upcoming webinars that we will get scheduled and send out invitations for. Again, we will send a recording of this webinar today as well as a link to the slide deck, so you can have those for future reference. I know there's a lot of great information included in these slides, so be on the lookout for that. Those of you who did qualify for CPE today, we will process those certificates for you and get those out via email. We ask if you can please be patient. It does take us a few days to get those out to you, but we will try to get those out to you as promptly as possible. Again, just want to thank John and Vicki today for the great presentation, and thank you all for attending. We look forward to the next webinar, hopefully coming up soon. Thanks again.
Thank you all. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.